But while President Donald Trump and the Prime Minister are dining in The Hague at the NATO summit, for Donald Trump, difficulties are beginning to arise back in Washington, D.C. over the outcome of America's strikes on Iran's nuclear sites last weekend. According to the New York Times, and this reporting is now also being stood up by CNN, a preliminary classified U.S. report says that the American bombing of Iran's nuclear sites sealed off the entrances to two of the facilities, but did not collapse their underground complexes, their underground buildings, and the early findings conclude that the weekend strikes only set Iran's nuclear program back by a few months. We're crossing live now to Washington, D.C., where my colleague Toni Waterman, LBC's US correspondent, is standing by. I mean, Toni, I realize that these are early reports about what the intelligence community is assessing about the impact of those bunker-busting bomb strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. But this is definitely going to put a crimp in Donald Trump's claim that Iran's nuclear program has been obliterated, completely eliminated, as he has claimed over the past 48 hours.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Simon. This is completely opposite, it seems, to what the president had really been claiming since the hours after that bombing was made public. This is a report, according to CNN and the New York Times, from the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is the Pentagon's intelligence arm. And it essentially says that there was damage that was done, but it is not the complete devastation of this facility, like the president had said, and that the report also confirmed, according to these reports, that Iran's stockpile of that enriched uranium was moved before the strikes. This is something that was speculated about even in the early hours after that bombing took place, when you had the Nuclear Energy Agency saying that they couldn't detect any sort of radioactivity coming from those sites. We had those satellite images in the days before that showed these, caravans of lorries outside of these sites that presumably were moving this material to some sort of secret location. But in terms of the delay here, so before this attack, U.S. intelligence agencies had said that it would be a couple of months before Iran would be able to make a bomb. Of course, President Trump contradicted this and said that it was in the offing, that it was very close, much closer than a couple of months. But this report is saying now is that it's likely set Iran's nuclear program back only by 6 months, which is really not that much time, especially if this enriched uranium has been moved to some sort of secret location.
Well, and it was notable last night that Vice President J.D. Vance was being interviewed on Fox News, and on multiple occasions, Brett Baier, the anchor of the program, attempted to pin him down on whether the Trump administration knew where that enriched uranium was, and he kept sidestepping the question, in fact saying, well, that's not the question you should be asking, because he wanted to talk about the destruction of Iran's uranium enrichment facilities and wanted to park this issue of whether the Iranians had essentially scarpered with their enriched uranium because they realized the attack was going to occur. But what these reports from CNN and the New York Times are indicating is that the intelligence community doesn't even necessarily think that they destroyed Iran's uranium enrichment facilities.
No, they might still be damaged, but perhaps they're still intact. Don't forget, when you look at the Fordow site, that is deep, deep inside a mountain. So when we look at those aerial satellite images, we can't see down in those holes to what the destruction is like at that point. And you're exactly right about the vice president. He was asked about this. He was dodging that question. But that is the exact question that should be asked right now, because that was the operational objective of going into Iran and bombing these sites. And I have to say, Simon, that in the press briefing that took place last Sunday after this bombing took place with the Defense Secretary and General Dan Kane, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they were almost already walking this back a little bit. The defense secretary said multiple times that Iran's nuclear ambitions had been destroyed, which is much different than the actual facilities. And General Kane, when he was asked about the battle damage assessment, said that the 3 sites were extremely damaged, but that it was too soon to say whether Iran still retains some nuclear capability. So this is perhaps one of the things that they were concerned about. These bunker-busting bombs were not battle-tested ever before. They had never been used in an operation like this, and they do have certain limitations in terms of how far down into the ground they can actually burrow before they explode. So this was always the big question, and it seems as if from this report that complete obliteration of these sites may not be true, and in fact, they might be somewhat still intact.
Toni Waterman, thanks very much indeed for that live update from Washington, D.C. I'm also